The family dinner table is not just where we eat, it is where the food we share is nourishment, as well as kinship, culture, even economics. For a self-professed foodie in a globalizing world, that's the recipe for a great book. Enter Jan Wong, an award-winning journalist and author of several books, whose latest is called Apron Strings: Navigating Food and Family in France, Italy, and China. And we're delighted to welcome her to the studio tonight. Hi, Jan.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, thanks.
So with this book, you decided to travel in order to learn more about home cooking around the world. Why home cooking as opposed to food in general?
I was interested in what families eat. I wasn't interested in the fancy Michelin-starred restaurants, although they're great too. I wanted to know whether people in this very busy world were still sitting down and cooking traditional food, whether they had been impacted by globalization, or whether they were eating ready-to-eat meals, that they picked up at the supermarket. I wanted to just know what they're feeding their families.
And beyond being a foodie, as we just said, your family owned a restaurant, several restaurants.
Yes. In Montreal.
In Montreal.
My father studied engineering at McGill, and after he worked as an engineer for a while, he thought the pay was really crummy, and he thought he'd open a business. And he went to work in Chinatown as a maitre d', and then he opened his own restaurant. He opened the first Chinese restaurant outside of Montreal, Chinatown. This is in the 50s. And then it was very successful. He also started home delivery, free delivery. Until then, takeout Chinese food. Mm-hmm. Until then, there was only barbecue chicken takeout. So that was one of his innovations.
And all you can eat too, right?
Yes.
That's the big one.
Yeah, and he opened about 5 restaurants. He was very successful, could not cook to save his life. We had to hide all our good pots and pans from him. He liked to eat, and he brought in chefs from his ancestral village. My father is Canadian born, but he was sent back to China during very poor times in Montreal, and so he's pretty traumatized as a little kid, but he ended up learning how to speak Chinese, and he had connections to the village, so he brought in real chefs. And so my dad opened this big flagship restaurant on DeCary Boulevard called Bill Wong. He named it after himself. And he had partners, and he came to Toronto and for a cousin's wedding, and at the rehearsal dinner, he had an all-you-can-eat roast beef buffet. And he looked around, he said, I could do this with Chinese food. It's perfect, because Canadians don't go out in big groups of 10 to eat, but this way they can have 20 kinds of dishes. So he persuaded his partners, let's have an all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet. It was a huge success, huge. And as a kid, I would sometimes work the Mother's Day crowd, because my dad would give out free roses, so I would put on this Chinese outfit and give roses to every lady that looked old enough to be a mother. So probably I gave it to all the 16-year-olds. And it was hugely successful, and then it was copied. I think my dad was the first.
And your son, Sam, your younger son, is the opposite of your dad. How does he see food?
Well, Sam loves to cook. He's curious about it, and ever since he was a little kid, and he would stand on a chair in the kitchen and cook. He would chop things, he would learn to cut, and he would learn to bake. So he's worked in many restaurants, and his goal was to be a chef, but I'm not so sure now. He's having second thoughts, because that's a really hard life, and he's seen it.
He's seen it firsthand.
Yeah, and he said, how will I ever get a girlfriend if I'm working in a kitchen? Because the only time I can go on a date is Sunday at 11 o'clock at night. So he's rethinking it, but he's a great chef.
And in the book, you travel to 3 different countries. You go to France, Italy, and China. Why those 3 countries?
Well, they're my 3 favorite cuisines. And I love Japanese food too, and I love Indian food, but I thought French food is just magnificent. And Italian food, I mean, really, it's just amazing. And then, of course, Chinese food I love. And I also had to consider the languages. So Sam and I both speak English, French, and Chinese. So the Italian was the only hole, and I tried to fill it by studying it. before I left.
And the interesting thing about the book is that it's kind of a history lesson as well. When you're in China, you're surprised that they're using Italian cookware. And then when you're in Italy, they're using woks.
Yeah, I was so surprised. They're making risotto in a wok. I said, what do you call this? Un wok. It's like, okay.
So in what ways has globalization affected the food that we eat and how we eat?
Well, I was really interested. First of all, globalization is not just in our era. So in France, I was fascinated to see that Caterina de' Medici, actually it's pronounced Medici. My Italian professor told me it's not Medici, it's Medici. When she married a French prince in the Renaissance era, France was a pathetic place for food in those days. People didn't separate sweet from savory. Their wine was horrible. And Catherine of Medici came with her entourage of chefs and all the innovations. And she is the one that created French cuisine as we know it today.
Like haute cuisine?
Haute cuisine. Yeah. She brought the fork. Before she came, the French were going like this.
Can you imagine going to France and seeing that now?
Yeah, and so people don't understand that really French cuisine stems from Italian cuisine of the Renaissance. That Italians.
What are some of the dishes?
Ices. She brought artichokes. She brought the cheeses. They were very crude. France was very crude a cuisine in the Renaissance era. People don't realize that. She brought choux pastry, you know, the stuff that you make profiteroles in, and or cream puffs. That was her chef that came and brought that. And she would have these banquets with spun sugar. She had to win the hearts and minds of French people. That France was going through a lot of upheaval then. And so she did this sort of leader tour of France, and she would throw big banquets everywhere she went. So she shaped French cuisine. And then, of course, there was a lot of back and forth because France and Italy are neighbors, right? Mm-hmm. And they're separated by the Alps. So the farmers would go back and forth. Laborers would go back and forth. And so when we were in France, they were eating ravioli, which of course is ravioli, but they don't even think of that as an Italian dish. They would eat it. And they would eat pizza in Provence, but they consider that French. And then in Italy, what was interesting was, of course, pasta. And the people think Marco Polo brought it.
But that's not true.
Yeah, it's not true.
But China comes into that equation too, doesn't it?
Yes, because, well, when we were in China, what was fascinating was I really wanted to dive deep into the Chinese food. And every time we went out, the people we were with would want to go and have Irish pub food or Japanese food or pizza. It was driving me crazy. What it taught me was globalization is very strong right now because of the internet and YouTube videos. Everybody can learn everybody else's cuisine. But globalization started, you know, with Marco Polo and Catherine de' Medici. It's not a new phenomenon.
And you also dismantled several myths during your trip. The one I want to start with, though, is MSG. We all think that it's bad, it's terrible, but...
So, we'll end up in China, but I'm going to start back in France. Mm-hmm. We're making that ravioli. These are tiny little ravioli. And Bernadette, this wonderful woman who's a master cook, she's masterful, and she was the housekeeper for the Janssen family, so she took us under her wing. So we're making ravioli for a wonderful Sunday dinner, and she pulls out bouillon cubes. And I'm going, what are you doing? She goes, it's family cooking, you know, you work with what you've got. And it was delicious. And then we go to Italy, and we're making risotto, and these are wonderful home cooks. I mean, they're people who cook, but they're really good at what they do. They're nurses, they're accountants, they're secretaries, but they're cooks. And they're pulling out this gel, flavored gels. And they assure me it's good and it's fine. And they're throwing it in everything like spaghetti with fresh clams, in pasta fagioli, which is a pasta bean soup, fantastic. And they're just tossing it in. And they say, you buy this brand. And I'm not going to say the brand. We're not going to advertise. But I'm going, really? Really? And then I go to China, and this is hilarious. We're with 3 rich families. We're with their maids cooking. But the ladies of the house always come in like Martha Stewart, you know, like, I'm going to show you how to cook. They don't know how to cook. And so the maids have prepared everything. They do the mise en place. Everything's ready. And they don't use MSG. But then, as part of this fun thing I'm doing, they have chefs that you can hire on the internet.
I love that idea. That needs to come over here for like 20 bucks or something?
Yeah, for 20 bucks. They'll come to your house. It's called Love the Big Chef. There's many of them. So you go online and you go, Love the Big Chef. Who do you want? His picture's on. It's like a dating site. And so you go, oh, I like this guy. He can make Sichuan food. So he comes to the house. He walks in and goes, where's your MSG? And the maid's there and she goes, sorry, we don't have any MSG. And he's like, what are you talking about? And so I have this section in the book on what is MSG, how is it? It's a natural ingredient.
It's in your stomach too, right?
Yeah, it's in your stomach, it's in breast milk, it's in mother's milk. It's monosodium glutamate. It's a naturally occurring substance. And you know, all my friends in Toronto, when we go to Chinese restaurants, first of all, there's this really weird phenomenon. I don't know if other visible minorities experience this, but they think that only you can talk to the person who looks like you. Only you can talk to the waiter. So
perhaps they speak English.
The waiters speak
in
English.
Canada.
They're working in Toronto. But they say, can you ask the waiter for a glass of water? Can you ask? I was like, really? And then they say, can you tell him not to put any MSG in the food? And I go, no, I'm not doing that. And they look at me, but I'm allergic. I said, no, you're not allergic. This is just garbage. And they need to put it in. It's umami. It's the fifth taste. It was discovered 100 years ago by a Japanese chemist who was eating a seaweed soup with kelp in it. It's delicious. Sounds awful to people who don't like seaweed, but it's delicious. And he started doing the experiments. And then he isolated the crystal substance, which is MSG. And then it all started when some American doctor wrote to the American Medical Journal and said, oh, I get these headaches. And that's when it started. But it's been debunked over and over. It doesn't. It only gives you a headache if you drop in too much. But you would get a headache if you put too much salt in your food, too. It's called dehydration.
I also learned that you're not supposed to have lattes in Italy after a certain part of day.
Oh, and you're not supposed to ask for a latte either. So you go into an Italian coffee bar. If you ask for a latte, they're going to give you a glass of cold milk. But yes, there are all these Italian food rules. It's a very food-ruled society. So yeah, you can't order a latte after 11. Like, I guess you could, but everybody would stop what they were doing and look at you in horror.
And you get a glass of milk.
Yeah, and you get a glass. Yeah.
And pizza, you kind of created.
Yeah. Pizza. First of all, there's only one size. It's individual. Everybody orders their own pizza, and it's a big pizza. I mean, it's falling off the plate, right? But here's the rule: never eat it with your fingers, because I did. I went, oh, this is great, and I'm with a party of 20 people, because you only go out in big, huge parties. And I'm eating and it's flapping around and my hands are full of this pizza grease and I'm looking around and I'm realizing
you're the only one doing it.
So I put it carefully down and then I get out my knife and fork.
It just seems like a lot of work. I mean, pizza's meant to be eaten fast.
Well, that's what I think, but not in Italy. And when you're in Italy, you have to. So at one point, Sam was eating in this family and we were having fresh clams, spaghetti with fresh clams, delicious. And there was a lot of clam juice left in his bowl. And he tried to scoop it out with his spoon, and he couldn't. And so he picked up his bread, and he started, and they burst out laughing. Because another Italian food rule is you never eat bread with pasta. They really laughed. So it's like, what a funny country. But what a lovely country.
Another thing that you thought, because you had this impression that they made everything from scratch, and then you discovered that they used this thing called the bimby. What is that?
Oh, I would love to have a bimby, but they cost close to $1,800. So it's like a glorified blender, hot pot, everything. So you can make a cake in it. It has controls. And so you throw in your chocolate, you throw in your flour, you throw in your eggs, and it beats it up. And then you do this and you do that, and then you hit the button, and it makes. You have to bake it. So you have to pour it out of the bimby and put it in the oven. But it can make Chinese fish balls. In China, it's becoming a big thing. You can make stew, you can make sauces, you can make hollandaise and keep it warm, which is the trick with hollandaise. Very hard to make hollandaise and keep it warm without giving your guests salmonella poisoning. So the bimby is very precise. And you don't have to clean it either. When you're finished, you just put in water, hit another button, and it heats it, boils it, and then you just dump it out.
It sounds amazing.
I know.
It sounds. Did that take away any of the, I guess, the magic from the food? Because you know, the idea that this is everything's made from scratch.
And, no. I think that's one of the things that's a point I make in the book, is you don't have to kill yourself to make good home cooking. In fact, you shouldn't, because you should be in a good mood by the time you sit down. And if it's too much work. Sam, I remember in Italy, the bimby is one extreme, right? $1,800 for this gadget. But the other extreme was they didn't use chopping boards. They're cutting against the thumb. So carrots, they'd cut like this. They wouldn't go like this on a chopping board. And so Sam wanted to show them, like, guys, there's chopping boards. So he would show off. He'd whiz through the carrots, and they'd pat him on the head and just go right back to cutting. And I guess that's a traditional Italian thing. When the kitchens had no counters, they would just have a stove, so the mama would sit there and cut right into the pot. What else was interesting?
And the forks?
Oh, yeah, they don't have a lot of kitchen equipment. You can, even in France, they just have nothing, and they're, you know, nice pots, and they would just use a fork. But the really interesting thing was risotto. I never used to make it much, because the cookbooks would always say you have to stand there constantly stirring. No. You just throw in the olive oil, toast your rice a little, and then just dump in the broth. Yeah, you don't want to put in a lot of broth, but you don't have to stir it constantly.
You even made the point that there's one chef who did it with just one stir.
Yeah, one stir and it was done.
You provide a lot of historical context for what was happening in those 3 different countries. You write, that day it seemed like we were never going to have lunch. Peony was on a diet, and not like Stella Maria, whose idea of dieting was to eat, I'm probably going to kill this name, but dieting was to eat bagna cauda?
Yes.
Okay, pasta and carne cruda.
Yeah.
And then skip dessert. Peony didn't eat lunch, period. She told me she hadn't eaten rice in 10 days. Yeah. Paul was also trying to lose weight and had sworn off alcohol for 3 months. Sam and I exchanged worried glances. We'd come all the way to China to cook, but people had become so rich, they were afraid to eat. Anthea ate her poached eggs on mesclun. Peony was skipping entire meals. China had gone from famine to fasting in a single generation. What happened?
Well, they got so rich so fast. And so what you see in China now is it would be like the British Industrial Revolution happening in 10 years. That's what's happening in China. It's like, boom. They go from nothing to all this money, and then they want to be thin because they're rich, right? Rich people want to be thin. And so that's what's happening in China. So they can eat anything they want, but they don't eat anything. They don't want to eat. And my jaw dropped, because they're always worried about gaining an ounce. It's kind of like what we have gone through here in the last century. They have gone through it in a decade. And so I don't know if they see it themselves. I don't know if they see the irony, because one of them was telling me that when she was a kid growing up, she was so poor, and they didn't have enough to eat, but they would eat lard. They would melt it and then pour it over their rice. And she said it was the most delicious thing she ever ate. And now, you know, she can buy Australian imported steaks, and she can buy sushi, but they're not eating it. I mean, she did eat because we had to, and I was starving all the time in these homes with beautiful kitchens, $500 wastebaskets. That's how much she spent on her wastebaskets. And she carried it. She hand carried it. Well, no, she checked it in a suitcase. She had
through the airport.
Yeah, she had a suitcase for each of her garbage bins. It's just, I can't make this up.
Was it different with the children, with how they approached their children?
So the children were...
Because they were kind of detached from their parents.
Yes.
But with the kids, were they different?
In China now, the kids are being groomed for success. And success is defined as making lots of money. And so the kids are over-programmed. They're kind of a version of a Canadian kid, but on steroids. I mean, we also over-program our kids here. And we also want them to go to university and then get the job. But not like in China. In China, that's all they're talking about when the kid is 8 years old or 10 years old is like, my friend asked me, I was telling her about some of my neighbors and they were plastic surgeons and really rich. And so she wanted to know, oh, you can make money as a plastic surgeon? I said, oh, yes. And then she said, okay, that's what you're going to study at university. She's pointing to her little kid. It's like, so that people don't talk like that in Canada. We don't really do that. But we do want our kids to have a good job.
Just to go back a bit with the people who are now rich but not eating, you stayed with wealthy families in China. Do you think that only told part of the story? Would it have been different with other families, maybe?
Well, with this book, you have to choose. Like, you have to choose. So I deliberately didn't want to be in Provence, and I didn't want to be in Tuscany. I didn't want to go to areas that had been written about a lot. In China, I thought, well, you know, I was a foreign correspondent in Beijing, and I lived in Beijing as a student, so I didn't want to go to Beijing. That's old territory for me. Shanghai is new. And when my friend proposed super rich families, I thought, you know what, that would be really interesting because this is a phenomenon in China, the super rich. The migrant labor is very important. And I've never spent any time around these people. And I don't think they've been written about much because what super rich person would let a journalist interview them?
Or live with them.
Or live with them. But because of my connections and because it's a book about home cooking, they said, okay. So I found you can't write about the whole world. You have to pick, okay, these people, okay, these people. And of course you cross your fingers that you'll get enough material. And I had so much material. And so it's all a little accident of whatever happened, but I think it worked out really well. And I don't think I would have, I mean, a Chinese ordinary middle-class family would have been okay too. But the real change for me is the super rich and the migrants. That's where the movement's happening. So I think it was good.
And in France and Italy, people ate communally. They ate together. It seemed like it was like an all-day event.
Yes.
You ate, then you started.
Then we got ready for the next meal.
Then you started getting ready for the next meal.
That's a little exaggerated because we were there, because they were really trying to show us. But yes, they prepare for meals.
And they ate together. What was it like in China?
In China, because of the ambition and the stress and the pace, the family meal was suffering. So contrary to what I would expect in a place that had 2,000 years of respecting the family, in China it was falling by the wayside. So at dinner, often the kid would be at a lesson and we'd have to wait. The kid would be at debating class or, you know, art class or something, and, you know, we'd have to wait, or the friend would come over for extra tutoring so the meals would be adjusted and bumped up. They would be hiring private tutors in math because the kid had to get ahead. Or the kid would be on video games all afternoon in their own suite, right? Such a big house. And the kid would be eating potato chips.
And so when it was time for dinner, they weren't hungry.
They weren't hungry. And most interestingly, was only 2 generations. Usually the husband wasn't there. So it was 1.5 generations. The grandparents were never there, and the husband was never there. The grandparents were never there because they were living on their own now because everybody was rich.
What do you think are the long-term impact on Chinese culture?
It's bad. I think it's bad. When families don't eat together, I think they grow apart. I think it's good for your mental health for everyone to sit down at dinner table and deal with whatever's going on in their lives. If you just run off to your, you know, math tutor and the husband's making lots of money, usually in another city, or he's on a business trip, and the grandparents are not part of the fabric of your life anymore, I don't think that's good for the family unit. I think it helps you become estranged.
We have 1 minute left, but I was wondering if I could ask your opinion on this. Having been in different countries and with the different families, did you notice one was happier than the other?
Oh. I think Italy was the happiest, and they have so many economic problems, but they value the family meal time. And they have a cuisine called cucina povera, which means cuisine of the poor. So you don't have to spend a lot of money. Spaghetti with tomato sauce is fantastic if it's made right. Doesn't cost anything. So I think of the three countries, the Italians are the closest to having happiness.
And because of the communal eating, or?
Because of the communal eating and because of the cuisine. The cuisine isn't demanding a lot of work. It's quick and easy.
And a lot of the families grew their own food, right?
Yes, they grow their own food. They often will have friends over. It's just, spaghetti is the dish that you can make for 2 people or 10 people. It's almost the same amount of work. And you can't say that about many cuisines. So I think Italians, know how to live, and they know how to love. I mean, it's a cliche, but it's true.
You ate a lot on this trip. Yeah. I was quite jealous.
I gained a size, I think.
And it's probably hard to pick one dish, but if you could, what dish was your favorite on your trip?
I do have a favorite. It's spaghetti carbonara. It's made with bacon and eggs. No cream.
No cream or garlic.
Well, Mary Stella was always shouting, no garlic, but I put in garlic.
You made it your way.
Yeah.
Well, Jan, thanks so much for being here. Fantastic book.
Thank you.
Learn new languages, recipes, and also how you see your impact on a family that could live across the ocean. It's a great read. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.